to my computer.
Recording.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our HPNA Stories from the Field. Our Alaska HPNA chapter, we're a local group that is combined of nurses. We strive to promote mentorship and education across the state surrounding hospice and palliative care nursing issues. And we really wanted to start this series to hear from nurses all across the state on why palliative care is important to you and how it integrates in your day-to-day work as a bedside nurse or as any kind of a nurse, because we know that palliative care is across all nursing fields. So today we have Broderick, who is an ICU nurse at Providence, and we wanted to hear a little bit from her about what she has experienced with palliative care in the ICU, and also some stories about how it has also maybe had an effect in her own life. So Becca, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your role in the ICU and how long you've been a nurse and what that's been like for you.
Yes. I've been a nurse since 2013. I started out in like an intermediate care floor working with dialysis patients. And then after a few years, I transitioned to the ICU. And then we moved up to Alaska in 2016. So I've been in the Providence ICU since 2016. And the Providence ICU is very unique in the aspect of you get to take care of every type of patient there. It's not just cardiac ICU, you have your med-surg patients, you have your trauma patients. So it's a really great opportunity to learn about all different types of nursing and all different types of critical care nursing. And when I got up there to the Providence ICU, I really wanted to figure out if I wanted to, kind of what I wanted to do as far as nursing goes. And I noticed in the rounds that there was a palliative care nurse or a nurse practitioner or, somebody within the palliative care group. And I just saw like how amazing the palliative care group was to be what a lot of you guys told me is like, this is an extra layer of support for the patient and the family to come alongside them. You've got people that come into the ICU and some of them have been chronically ill for a really long time. They have an acute episode and they're at a crossroads of what do I want to do? What brings me joy? What gives me the highest quality of life? Or you have other patients that come in and they've had a traumatic injury and they are left like quadriplegic, paraplegic. And these patients, I think, benefit and their families so much from palliative care to help, like, let's manage your symptoms. Let's see, what sort of psychosocial support we can bring to the family and to the patient. And then, for a lot of these patients, it is at the end of life. And so, like, how can we make your end of life honor you, honor your traditions, your culture, your heritage, your religious preference, and make it a peaceful process. So I thought that extra layer of support is so needed and valued in ICU. And I wish it was in every ICU.
Yeah, it's kind of a newer area, newer in the sense of the history of palliative care, but it is becoming much more the norm to embed palliative in the ICU. Do you feel like there's a way that is there something unique that you've seen that how palliative care is used in the ICU, or any interesting ways that it's, not that you could compare it to a floor situation, but anything that you feel is different in how palliative care works in the intensive care unit?
As far as like in the intensive care versus just the regular floor, or just at the hospital in general?
I think both.
Yeah. I would say in the intensive care, because it is an intense, environment, those questions of what do I want for my life, or, questions, for the advanced directives that usually are not filled out. All those questions of like, do I want to be intubated? Do I want to have nutrition, hydration, or do I want to just go comfortably? And I think having those, it's difficult for, in my opinion, the intensivist to be saddled with answering all of those questions and then also taking care of the enormous, intense situations that we have. And so I feel like it's a amazing area for palliative care to come in and be like, okay, we're going to have those conversations, along with the intensivist. But I think that is a very unique opportunity, so that it's not just all on one provider to have every single conversation. So it's a very collaborative environment.
And that's true of, the bedside nurse as well, having a role in those conversations. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Because there's been a few times that I've been in on the, the conversations with the intensivist, with the family. And, as the bedside nurse, I can tell them exactly what I'm seeing as far as the patient goes. And I think that I know a lot of times the family, they will look at me and ask me, like, is there any hope? What should we do? And, you can never tell a family member what to do, and you never want to, overstep those boundaries in any shape, fashion, or form. But, I feel like they feel comfortable asking questions, to the bedside nurse, as far as like, how can we make them more comfortable? And so you can answer those questions.
And then you're there with the patient all day. And so you really can be an advocate for them and a partner with them and making sure their voice is heard.
Right.
You get to know the patient so well.
Yes. I remember, Tracy, I think you and I, the very first time that we worked together, there was that one patient, and I felt like that was it was a very, sad, tense situation, but it was, I felt like we really honored the patients and the family's wishes, even though maybe it, I think it also has to do with maybe you don't like totally understand, like, if a patient wants to continue fighting, that's, their prerogative, or if they're, if they're ready to, not withdraw support, but withhold support, and just to be, have the comfort care. And so learning how to be respectful and also advocate for the patient, I think, is really important. And I think all of us were able to do that in that one patient, and then they passed very peacefully. And it was a really amazing experience to be a part of, and to be at the bedside when the patient passed with the family. Mm-hmm. So, and everybody was at peace with it. So
yeah, there's a lot of layers to palliative care that I think people don't always see, but I think you guys as bedside nurses can kind of see all the different pieces, because it isn't just a white and black situation of like yes to this or no to this. There's so many different factors, and you're right, in the ICU it's such an intense situation that doing things or not doing things has like very different outcomes. And so it's a really dynamic piece, and honoring them is the most important part of it all. So yeah,
exactly.
Very well put. Thanks, Becca.
Yeah.
So has there been a specific moment in your life that you feel like resonated with what you do with your work?
In my life personally, yeah. So it was last year when I had a surgery, and I ended up having a cardiac arrest during the surgery, and went into immediate heart failure and was in the ICU. Obviously recovered now, but at the time it was a really weird situation, being the nurse as the patient, and like I remember like seeing all the nurses running around me, and I'm like, am I really the one in bed here? This is weird. And there was a point in time where they did not know if I was going to make it. And I remember thinking about like all of the questions that I hear the palliative group like ask, like, is this the type of quality of, at the time my physical shape was very poor. And I remember thinking like, is this the type of quality of life I want? And I was like, no, it's not, and I was at the point where I was going to be like, I do not want to be intubated. I don't want, they're considering putting a balloon pump. And I was like, if a lot of stuff doesn't work, I'm not going to continue. And it was interesting because I don't know if I would have had those thoughts, like to be like, really, what do I actually want and how far do I want to go, if I had not been a part of so many conversations at the bedside as a nurse with family. And I felt very comforted by like being able to ask myself those questions and to be honest with myself, even though, it could have meant, dying,
Mhm.
but I was very much at peace with it. And it kind of really reinforced like, wow, this is so needed. I remember thinking this is so needed at the bedside. Where's my palliative care? I was like, I need palliative care.
Oh,
Um,
make a little button
so
on the call light.
I know. I almost called one of you guys.
Oh,
But and so I was like, we're gonna do what we can medically do. And if it doesn't work, then I'm at peace with my faith and my life and everything. So but just asking yourself those questions about what you want if you were ever in that situation. I know, a lot of us younger folks, we don't always ask that question. And I think one of the things that we see at Providence, especially with like having the patients that come in with a trauma, I had a really young patient the other day and we ended up withdrawing care, and it's heartbreaking.
Mhm.
So, but, even having those questions, asking yourself, like, what would you want in certain situations? What do you want? What is an acceptable quality of life for you? And, are you at peace with that? I think is really important to ask. And, what brings you joy in life? And I was just like, laying in bed does not bring me joy.
Yeah. And it sounds like you were able to actually communicate that as part of the decision-making process at the time. But this corollary to thinking about those things early is communicating those to loved ones, so that if you
Right.
weren't able to speak, they would be able to speak for you.
Yes. Well, and actually, before I went into surgery, I wrote a long list out for my husband. And he knew, like, if I was not able to speak for myself, and my parents also know what I would want and what I would not want. And I actually wrote it out for him as well.
That's such a
So that,
gift. Yeah.
yeah. And, a lot of people don't know how to be their own advocate. And I think it goes back to, as a bedside nurse, it just reinforced how much like I need to be an advocate for my patients, because I knew what to ask for. I knew what could possibly happen, but you can't expect the average public to know everything that goes on in the hospital. So if you don't have somebody that you can consult who understands, I think you're like, oh, I'm gonna do whatever they tell me to do. And
Yeah.
which they had my absolute best in mind. But if that wasn't what I wanted, then I think we as healthcare professionals, you want to respect the patient's wishes. So
that's such a good point too, because people, when they're admitted, whether it's to a medical floor, an intensive care floor, they're vulnerable, they're frail. They may not have the ability to ask those difficult questions or know to even talk about those things. So that's really true, that sometimes being an advocate is just kind of having the conversation, even if they don't know they're having it, or even if they've never spoken about those things before. It's just kind of engaging with them in that way.
right. And I mean, and especially with COVID, I mean, I was able to have one person at the bedside with me, and that was amazing support. But, I know a lot of places are just now opening it back up to having like one or two people at the bedside. So if, like you said, if you're the patient, you're vulnerable, you're exhausted, you're sick, you need support. You don't always, in this year of COVID, it's been difficult to have that.
Very hard. Thank you for sharing such a personal story. I think it's a beautiful balance of your nurse brain at work and then your human side, and also how you were able to kind of blend those together in a really difficult time. So I really appreciate you sharing such a personal story. I think it's helpful for people to know that no matter what your background is, even if you are an intensive care nurse, when you're sick, it's still scary and vulnerable, and you still need to have those conversations. So thank you.
Thank you, Becca.
Do you feel like there's anything, last question, is there anything you'd want to share to like a new nurse, or any tips or wisdom you have in the nursing field, not just in the realm of palliative care, but just something that you feel like is important for anyone else to know after what you've been through in your career?
Oh, I think one of the biggest things that I was, when I first started, was I started out like working on a floor where there was a lot of like senior nurses who had a lot of experience. And that was invaluable for me because they, they're just, going along doing, not worrying about anything. And I'm just, brand new nurse, freaking out over the littlest thing, like, should I give a colace or not? Type thing. And so they just, just being able to have, like, even if you're not able to work with a floor that has a ton of senior nurses, find a senior nurse that can be a mentor and, help you navigate, because it's scary going out the first time on your own. And I would say like the first 2 years, it's a big learning curve and you have to give yourself grace. And, my preceptor told me, she's like, you just remember you are one person. You can do one thing at a time, and you have your education that your priority is airway, breathing, circulation. And then everything else will fall into place.
That was perfect. All right. Well, thank you for sharing your stories today. We really appreciate you doing this interview, and we wish you well. And we look forward to hearing from more nurses out there. If anyone's interested, please contact us.
And yeah, if anybody's interested in learning more about HPNA, you can find us on Facebook, or we have a website, a nursing network website. You can just Google us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.